This is the Thriving Dentist Show with Gary Takis, where we help you develop your ideal dental practice, one that provides personal, professional, and financial satisfaction.
Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Dentist Show. I'm Gary Takis, your podcast co-host. We have a great episode for you today. It's a tactical episode. It's titled, Fix These 4 Payment Mistakes to Collect Everything You Produce. This would be a great episode to play in a team meeting with your team members. Well, before we get to that episode, a couple of announcements to make. First announcement is coming up shortly, maybe a month or so after this episode publishes. On December 6th, we have our next Thriving Dentist Masterclass. This masterclass is titled Grow Your Practice 10% or More Every Year. We've timed that masterclass to be the first week of December because we want you to hit the beach running in 2024. And one of the things that I work with closely with our clients is helping them really embrace a growth strategy. You know, growth in a practice solves so many issues and creates some great results. So we teach our clients to grow by at least 10% every year. And those would be years where we're not adding more providers. We're not adding more hygiene days or another hygienist or perhaps, you know, an associate doctor. If you happen to be adding providers, then we want to grow by 10% a year plus the growth that we would anticipate from adding the providers. Do you know if you grow 10% a year in less than 7 years, in actually 6.2 years, your practice will double. If you grow by just 10% a year, in less than 7 years, your practice will double. So if you currently have $1 million practice, in less than 7 years, it's a $2 million practice if you've grown 10% a year. Well, in that masterclass, I'll detail everything you need to know about growing your practice. Come join us. It's December 6th. It is a one-evening masterclass, 3 hours, very inexpensive. You get 3 hours to see, less than $90 tuition. Go to thrivingdentist.com/masterclass. Look forward to seeing you there. Hey, the second announcement I have is we have a returning guest, a clinical contributor. This is Dr. Avi Patel. Dr. Patel is a clear aligner expert, and he's going to share a quick tip with you about how to get even greater success with aligner patients in your practice. You're going to enjoy this tip from Dr. Avi Patel.
Hey, it's Dr. Avi, your clear aligner advisor. I'm back again with another tip. So with aligners, and you're starting off, and let's say you've never done a case before, my advice to every doctor is to just start simple, okay? Don't try to take on crazy cases. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to push the needle. Just stick to simple crowding cases in both arches, or even simple spacing cases in both arches. If you're looking at molar relationships, you know, class 1 relationships are great. And just focus on getting the teeth into a healthier position, okay? And where I'm coming with this is when you have something that's simple, you don't have to stress so much on the tooth movement, but it allows for you to focus more energy on what to do with the team. And that is how you are actually going to be able to scale doing aligners as a GP, because it's not just moving the teeth. It is, how do you schedule the patient? What does your team say to the patients whenever they're in the office? How do you get patients to say yes to treatment? It's all these other things that play into it. And so if you're trying to master all of that and you're taking on complex cases, it's going to be very stressful, and you're probably not going to be successful, and then you won't enjoy doing the procedure. So that being said, my tip is to start simple and then go from there. And if you want more tips, I do have a free masterclass. It's about an hour and a half long, and I go over everything you need to know to get started with clear aligners as a GP. All right, take care. Thank you.
Welcome back to the Thriving Dentist Coaching in Action segment. This is Naren, your co-host. We have a wonderful episode today. Before we jump into the episode, I want to take a minute to acknowledge Dr. Patel for that wonderful tip. Greatest success with aligners. It's less than 2 minutes. Go find this episode, fix these 4 mistakes to collect everything you produce. Literally go to thrivingdentist.com, find this episode, and then go to the show notes, and you will see the actual video where Dr. Patel talks about, this tip. And of course, if you want to follow him, you can get all of his handles and everything else on that page. So find the show notes and enjoy. This episode today, Fix These 4 Mistakes to Collect Everything You Produce, came from a simple idea. The idea is that you could be really, really good at business, but if you're not collecting what you are producing, what you are working so hard for, then you might as well have not done that service in the first place. So having that mindset, really mastering that, really avoiding the mistakes is really, really vital. And today, Gary's going to talk about, based on his 43 plus years of experience in dentistry, what are like the 4 biggest mistakes practices make when it comes to collections, collecting everything they produce. So Gary, let's jump in and have some fun.
Yeah, I'm excited to share this information because cash flow is king. We all know that. And I will make a bold statement starting out that I think all of you will be nodding along in agreement. I'm going to say that there is very little that is more frustrating than doing dentistry and not getting paid for it. Now, Naren, you can't identify with that since you're not a dentist. But as a business owner, I think you could just simply rephrase that differently. Is anything more frustrating than doing the work that you do and not get paid for it?
I agree. I mean, you work really, really hard and you try to do the best you can. And then, of course, if you don't get paid for it, then yeah, that's not fun.
It's not fun. Yeah. So I've identified 4 common payment mistakes, and we're going to march through those and solve those for you. But before I do that, I want to give you a little bit more motivation. Naren, I'm going to share some information that I think even you don't know when it comes to Google, and you're the Google expert by far.
Thank you.
But Naren, would it surprise you if I told you that among 1-star Google reviews, 80% of the time it originates from a patient who has a payment dispute with the office? Does that surprise you?
Well, it makes sense because a lot of times they don't want to pay for whatever reason, and they use Google review as i.e. leverage. As
leverage, yeah. But 80% of negative of a 1-star Google review, 80% of this comes from Google. 80% of them for a 1-star review for a dental office is made by a patient who has a payment dispute. The other 20% are other reasons they were upset. Maybe they felt like, they were treated rudely or not kindly, or something happened, regarding the appointment. That's
but
one.
Of course, the patient doesn't say that on the review, right? So it's kind of, you don't realize it unless you dig into it, right, and you kind of investigate.
Right. But 4 out of 5 1-star reviews originate from a patient who has a payment dispute. So if we can eliminate the payment disputes, we eliminate the possibility of you getting, or the likelihood that you'd get a 1-star review.
So you're motivating me. You're telling me that this is a smart way to, reduce those 1-star reviews. Social
proof's important, isn't it?
It is. It is.
And it's possible that any practice could stub their toe and get a negative review. That's entirely possible. Now, many of them are malicious.
Right.
Many of them are fictitious. They're not even patients of your practice. It's just someone throwing mud at your practice. But even, the best practices can sometimes stub their toe. And if 4 out of 5 of those come from patients with a payment dispute, if we avoid payment disputes, we're going a long way towards reducing the likelihood that you'd ever get a 1-star review. So anyway, let me hopefully I've properly motivated you as you're thinking about this. Well, I want to follow that age-old, timeless habit that Stephen Covey talked about. Habit number 2 in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was begin with the end in mind. So let's begin with the end in mind. I want to establish 4 KPIs used to measure successful payment performance. 4 KPIs. One of them you'll likely be familiar with, but the other 3 will likely be new information to our listeners. So let me march through the KPIs, and then let's talk about how to achieve those by avoiding the 4 most common mistakes. So KPI, key performance indicator number one, is collection percentage. And in a thriving practice, we collect 99% or more of our adjusted production. 99% or more of adjusted production. And that's, by the way, all four of these KPIs are challenging. They're not easy to achieve. If they're easy, everyone would be doing it. They're not easy to achieve.
Correct.
But in a thriving practice, we collect 99% or more of our adjusted production. That means we have to adjust off the insurance adjustments if you're a PPO practice, because those aren't collectible. So we're measuring your collections against your adjusted production, and your target's 99% or above. While these are difficult KPIs, I can point to clients all over the country, clients of ours that are achieving these each and every month. So they are possible.
Right.
Number two, you have an accounts receivable ratio of 1.0 or less. Now, how do you compute your accounts receivable ratio? It's a simple arithmetic problem. And we compute that by taking your total accounts receivable at this moment, everything that's owed the practice, whether it comes from an insurance company or it comes from a payer. There's two payers in every dental practice. There's insurance companies that provide payment sometimes, and there's patients that provide payment. So we take your total accounts receivable, everything that's owed the practice as of right now, and we divide that by your average monthly production. And we want that number to be 1.0 or less, 1.0 or less. So we want your total accounts receivable to be less than 1 month's average production. And Naren, I want to brag on one of our clients. I did a mid-year review for him just yesterday. I won't use his names. I didn't ask permission, but I am bragging on him. I think he'd be happy to me share this. I looked at his accounts receivable ratio, and it was 0.62. 0.62. Naren, how's that on the report card?
Excellent. A plus.
A plus. Yeah, this is a practice that is producing about 120 a month in adjusted production. And his accounts receivable were in the low 70s, like 71,000. So absolutely collecting everything they produce for sure. So accounts receivable ratio of 1.0 or less is KPI number two. KPI number three has to do with aging. So we now look at the aging of your accounts receivable. You know, aging is usually broken into current, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and then 90 plus is how the columns break out. And in a thriving practice, we have no more than 20% of your total receivables aged 60 days or more. No more than 20%. That means 80% are in the current to 60-day range. The more of your accounts receivable that are current or less than 60 days, the more likely you are to get paid. The older they get, the less likely you are to be paid. So there's an aging detail to start paying attention to. And then finally, a fourth KPI has to do, especially with PPO practice, although it could apply to fee-for-service practices too, but primarily PPO practices. And it has to do with how we manage the unpaid insurance claims. The reason why this could apply, Naren, to a fee-for-service practice is that some PPO plans allow you to accept assignment of benefits and they'll send you the check. Some do. And if they do, I recommend that you check the box and have the insurance company send you the check because it's less inconvenient for the patient to do it that way. So for PPO practices and even fee-for-service practices, we want to look at how many, by number, how many insurance claims you have, outstanding unpaid insurance claims that are aged 30 days or more, And in a thriving practice, we want no more than 20 insurance claims per full-time doctor in your practice. No more than 20. So if you had 2 full-time doctors in your practice, then no more than 40 claims are aged 30 days or more. That's a very difficult, actually all 4 of those KPIs are very difficult, but they're very possible because we can point to clients all over the country in my coaching work that have achieved those 4 KPIs. And basically when you achieve those 4 KPIs, it means that you are collecting everything you're producing. So now let's talk about the 4 mistakes that I see dental offices make and how to correct those. Mistake number 1 is not practicing financially arranged dentistry. Not practicing financially arranged dentistry. This is like the fundamental rule to collect everything you produce. You always want to practice financially arranged dentistry. And that simply means that the patient understands the fees and specific arrangements are made for payment before any treatment begins. Naren, what's the key word in that definition? What's the key operative word?
Before treatment begins.
Before.
Yes.
Before. If you do the dentistry and then we talk about money, you run the opportunity of an upset, because if the patient has insurance, you realize, Naren, the patient knows nothing about their dental insurance. The patient knows except one thing: it pays everything.
Right.
Now that's a joke because it doesn't pay everything. But what do they think about their insurance? It pays everything.
It pays everything. I mean,
Yeah.
like you said, it pays very, very little.
Pays a little, but they think, or they want to think, that it pays everything.
Mm-hmm.
So when you talk about money after, then we're committing a mistake. Now, I'll give you a different way to think about this. Naren, imagine that your car is acting up. Your car is acting up. It's making some noises, and it's not, you're getting down the road, but you know something's wrong with your car. So you take it to a garage,
Right.
take it to a mechanic. And you drop your, it's making some noise. You describe what's going on. And maybe the service writer at the garage says, well, we'll take a look at it. I might be able to get in today. I might not, but I'll likely have it ready for you by tomorrow afternoon. And then you go tomorrow afternoon to pick it up. And the service writer says, well, Naren, I've got good news and bad news for you. The good news is your car's done. It's ready to go, running like a top. Bad news is your transmission needed to be rebuilt. And we tried to troubleshoot it and do some fixes, but none of that worked. So it needed to be rebuilt. So we went ahead and rebuilt it. And your bill is $7,000, and you can take care of that by cash, check, or credit card. How would you feel about that?
I wouldn't.
You're not very happy.
Yeah, I'm not very happy.
In fact, the listeners can't see this, but Naren and I are on Zoom together, and Naren has a look of shock in his face. He's looking like, what? What happened? Well, that's what happens to your patient. Now, imagine it goes this way instead, Naren. Imagine it goes like this. You take your car into the garage. The service writer says, well, what we'll do is we'll do some diagnostics. Once we figure out what's going on, I'll reach out to you by phone, and I'll let you know what's going on and let you know what the, what it would cost to repair that. And imagine later in the day, they call you and say, Naren, I've got bad news. We ran the diagnostics on your car, and we need to rebuild the transmission. The kind of problems that are going on, we can't fix with some easier fixes. It has to be rebuilt. And unfortunately, the charge to rebuild your transmission is going to be $7,000. Before we start the work, I wanted to get authorization from you. And I want to share the information with you and get an authorization before we start. Now, you're not going to like the news.
Right.
But you're going to appreciate the way it's handled, correct?
100%. At least there won't be any dispute. There won't be any negative Google reviews.
Yeah,
for sure.
You told me.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing happens. That's what I'm asking you to do in dentistry. Now, in dentistry, as far as new patients are concerned, I'm going to suggest at least the caliber of our listeners on the Thriving Dentist Show. You probably don't have a problem with this with new patients. You probably have a good system for it.
Yes.
But where you can get sideways is with emergency patients. So the emergency patient came in, has a toothache. You worked them into the schedule. It's a busy day. And let's say we have an opportunity to provide some care rather than just do palliative care. And let's say we have an opportunity to do a root canal with the patient. And in your haste, doctor, to stay on time and to keep things moving, you dive in there and do a root canal. And then when the patient leaves, as they check out, your financial coordinator now has to tell them how much they owe for the root canal. What's wrong? That's like the first example of taking your car to a mechanic. You find out when you pick it up. And the way you can avoid this is, for an emergency patient, bring your financial coordinator. Once you have your diagnostics done and once you know what the treatment recommendation is, say to the patient, Naren, before I do this treatment, I'm going to bring Meg. She's our financial coordinator. I'm going to bring her into the room. And I want Meg to cover the finances with you so there's no surprises. And now Meg comes in the room. You don't take the bib off. You don't move the patient in the consult room. You just do this right there, chairside. You bring Meg in, and Meg says, I understand doctors recommended a root canal, and I wanted to cover the finances with you today so there's no surprises. And they go over with you before you start. And that's how we solve that. Who's the culprit here most of the time, Naren? Who's the guilty party here?
The guilty party, of course, You mean like the way we did it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The guilty party is the dentist.
Right.
The guilty party is the dentist in a haste to stay on time.
Yeah.
Is forgot to do financial arranged dentistry. And
Yeah.
those
So
are
I
the
mean,
ones
that's why I was
that
hesitating.
blow
I
up
mean,
on.
he's not the guilty party, just that.
Well, he's guilty
because
if he or she does the dentistry and then covers finances.
yes.
You're guilty of violating the financially arranged dentistry policy.
Got it. Got it.
And doctor, I'm going to come to your defense. You're very noble to try to stay on time.
Yeah.
But if you haven't covered the finances, that can be a difficult outcome with the patient.
Yeah. Because now the patient is no longer in pain and they're like, oh man, you didn't tell me it's going to cost me X.
Yeah. It should have been a happy event now that they're out of pain, but it turns out to be a negative event because they didn't know they were going to owe this.
Yes.
Yeah. Just like you didn't like the news at the garage when they said, well, the only option is to rebuild it. You don't like the news, but you do appreciate the courtesy in which it was handled. You're not surprised.
Because it's my decision, right? Like I could,
right.
I mean, I could say, well, I could have stayed in pain. Why didn't you tell me?
Right. Which typically people don't want to do.
Yeah, they won't do it, but they will use that defense when like at the end.
Oh, well, I wouldn't have had it done if I'd have known that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's after the fact. That's after they're comfortable.
Exactly.
When they're in pain, it's like
anything.
Here's my credit card. I'll take care of it.
Yeah.
All right. I won't belabor it any further, but doctor, try to avoid that accidental trap that you get into, and just always practice financially arranged dentistry. It's a key. All right. Mistake number 2 is not having a dedicated financial coordinator. In practices that have multiple admin team members, oftentimes multiple team members play some role in payment in the practice. But Naren, what happens when everybody's doing it?
Nobody's doing it.
Nobody's doing it. And I don't mean that in a critical way, but it means there's no accountability. There's no direct, accountability towards those 4 KPIs. So you want to have one person responsible for those 4 KPIs, even though other people may contribute to it. You want one person that's accountable to those, because that's how we manage by accountability instead of managing by crisis. And let that team member know that with like all of our team members, we're going to do a review every year, like we do with all team members. And we're going to look at a lot of different factors, reviewing your performance. And the number one way we're going to review your performance is these 4 KPIs. The better you do in meeting those 4 KPIs, the stronger your review is going to be. And now they know how important that is. They know what the priority is. So not having a dedicated financial coordinator is a mistake, because then everyone's pointing fingers at someone else. Mistake number 3 is not using your consultation room. Now, not every office has a consultation room, but for those that have them, much of the time they aren't used. Naren, I equate a consultation room in dental office a lot like if you're into fitness and you've bought a treadmill for your home gym. Maybe you have the gym in the basement. If you're in an area of the country, have basements. Maybe you dedicate a room to your home gym like we do. For many people, that treadmill gathers cobwebs and becomes a place to put your folded laundry.
Yes.
Right? Well, the consult room in a dental office kind of becomes like that treadmill. It becomes unused, and you want to avoid that. I would argue that the consult room is one of the most productive rooms in your practice, even though you don't measure productivity the same way you would measure an operatory. But it's most productive because it allows you to really ensure that you're going to get paid for everything you produce. So using your consultation room is
I love that mindset, Gary, because I know a lot of practices I've walked into. Usually the consult room ends up being this place they dump everything. There's so much stuff on the table. Yeah.
Yeah, it becomes a storage
room. You can't
room.
even walk into that room. It's just it's like.
Yeah. I'm going to argue that it's one of the most productive rooms. It's not productive in the way that your operatories are productive, but it's productive in terms of your payment performance for sure.
And also, I know you've taught people to present cases in that consult room, right? Like I know that's
absolutely. Yeah, that's where we present the dentistry, and that's where we make financial arrangements. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk about a recommendation. I saw the questions that were submitted, and it's going to give me an opportunity to talk about that specifically. And finally, the 4th mistake that gets in the way of you collecting everything you produce is you don't have enough payment options. You don't have enough payment options. Doctors, you've got to realize that a fair comment, it's not so much a question, it's more of a comment from your patient. Doc, I'd love to have that done, but I can't afford it. Think about Invisalign. So let's go back to our guest, Avi Patel. Let's use aligners, a non-brand name, but let's use aligners. And let's say your aligner fee is $5,500. That might be a fairly typical across the country aligner fee, something like that. And imagine the patient saying, well, I'd sure like to correct the crowding in my teeth, but I don't have an extra $5,500. So if you don't have enough payment options in your suite of payment options, it's not so much that it's going to affect your payment success. It's going to impact your case acceptance success.
Correct.
Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
So there are the 4 KPIs, and there's the 4 mistakes that practices inadvertently make. And again, let me recount those for you. Mistake number 1 is not practicing financial arranged dentistry. Mistake number 2 is no dedicated financial coordinator, single person that's responsible for that. Mistake number 3 is not using your consultation room. And mistake number 4 is not having enough payment options so that your patients can work high value dentistry into their budget. Well, let's hit pause here on the coaching action segment. And we have some great questions for our listeners, and we'll hit those next.
Welcome back to the Thriving Dentist Q&A segment. This is Narain. Gary, I have 4 questions for you. I enjoyed the conversation today about the 4 mistakes to collect everything you produce. Fixing these 4 mistakes to collect everything you produce will have a significant impact on your practice. So now these questions are getting based on those 4 mistakes or related to that episode you just did. The very first question I have is this. I don't have a consult room and no space to add one. How can I have better privacy for financial discussions without a consult room?
Yeah, I'm going to recognize that reality. There are many of you listening, or some of you listening may understand the importance of a consultation room or a consult room, but you don't have room for it. You can't add it. You're restricted by your space, and you can't add it. I get it. I see that not uncommonly. Now, if you're building a new office or expanding, I'm going to lobby for making space for a consultation room. But if that simply isn't in the cards right now, what do you do? I don't like the treatment room for financial discussions. So some of you might say, well, I just bring my financial coordinator in the treatment room. I don't mind doing that for emergency patients because that's the way to keep things very efficient. But as far as like new patients or going over details for patients in hygiene, I don't like to do that in the treatment room. And the reason I don't like doing it in the treatment room is that room is scary to people. It's not to us. All the equipment, all your armamentaria, we take it as second nature because that's our workspace. That's where we're comfortable with it. But do you think the typical patient is comfortable sitting down in the operatory chair in there?
I don't think so. I mean, like I'll speak for myself. When I'm in that chair, I want to get out as quickly as possible.
And so how useful is it to have a sit down conversation with you about money in that room? Not very good.
Not very effective, not conducive.
So let's talk about where not to do it. If you don't have a consult room, we're not going to do it at the front desk because that's a HIPAA violation. Right. In the way most front desks are organized, everybody in the reception room can hear everything that goes on at the front desk. So if we're talking about patients' finances, you're violating HIPAA. So I'm not the HIPAA police, but I don't want you violating HIPAA. That's not good. It's just not good for the patient. The patient doesn't appreciate it.
Yeah, it's very embarrassing, right? When there's 6 other people sitting there and you're talking about, oh, you owe me this, you owe me that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good. So we eliminate the front desk. We're eliminating the treatment room, because of the fear the patients feel in that room. I'll tell you a solution I used for one of my clients, and it's worked really well. So he has a nice private office. And in the private office, he has a small round table that's where he sits down and goes over treatment plans with patients. And I said to my client, hey, do you think we could also use that room to bring in our financial coordinator to sit down and go over finances with you. You're likely to be in a treatment room with the patient. He said, yeah, but Gary, look at my desk. Look at my desk. I'm embarrassed to say that I don't always keep a neat desk. I try to, but things stack up. And he has a conservatively designed office. The design decor is conservative. And I said, hey, I have an idea. Why don't you buy a roll top desk for your private office desk? And that way, when you're not at your desk, you can close the timbre door. You know how that works with a roll top desk there, and you close the timbre door and it covers up the mess. And he looked at me and he said, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. And he literally ordered a roll top desk, had it delivered the next week, and we started using his office for a consultation room. So maybe your private office could be used for that. It's not ideal. It does need to be clean. It does need to be presentable. And so we have to figure out some way to do that. But maybe that's the solution. Or look around. Is there a back office, a back front office area that we could simply carve out a space where we could sit down with the patient? So somewhere, and I will tell you that every time I've encountered this with a client, we've been able to solve it by walking around the office and come up with a creative solution based on the limitations that we had. We've been able to come up with something. So I'm going to suggest that maybe it could be a private office. And maybe if you and your financial coordinator walk around your office with eyes on where might we be able to do this, there might be a good solution for you. But we want to be doing it in private for sure. Great question.
Thank you, Gary. Let me ask you question number 2. I feel like my office does a good job of managing accounts receivable. However, on occasion, we do have a collection problem with individual patients. What resources would you recommend when we have not been successful in managing these accounts in-house?
So this is a collection question. Great question. I really appreciate that question. So there's 2 categories of collections. There is what's called soft collections, and there's hard collections. Let me talk about things that can be done in soft collections. Soft collections could be that you follow up with the patient by phone, by text, by email, and you attempt to get resolution on that. Another form of soft collections is to engage in a collection agency that would do that on your behalf. Those are essentially the 2 things that can be done in soft collections. Now, let me counterpoint that by talking about hard collections. Hard collections, here's some things you can do. You can garnish wages. Now, you need legal help to do that, but you can garnish wages. You can file a lien on any property that the patient has, or you could take the patient to small claims court. Now, I'm going to go on record as saying I do not recommend using hard collections. One of the reasons I don't recommend using hard collections is that you've got to spend money to now get money. You've got to spend money on an attorney to file garnish wages. You've got to spend money on an attorney to file a lien. You've got to spend time and money for small claims court. Here's what happens. If you've never been to small claims court, let me explain how that works. So you choose to take a patient to small claims court. Someone from your office has to go down to the courtroom. I don't know how it works, but in terms of what the order in which your case comes up, but I know Murphy's Law kicks in here. Your office manager goes down to small claims court. She has to be there at 8 a.m, and her case doesn't get called until 4:30 in the afternoon. She has to sit there all day. Every single time in small claims court, the judge will call you up, and then your office manager now participates with the court, and they call the patient. And guess what happened with the patient, Aaron?
Never shows up.
They're never there. And so you now get a judgment. You win, or did you really? You win because now you have the right to collect.
It's called a default judgment, right? Yeah.
You have the right to collect now.
Mm-hmm.
You had that before. You wasted an entire day on that. You get nothing. You get nothing. So I don't recommend hard collect. By the way, where do you think hard collections might end up in terms of Google reviews?
1-star review.
Is there less than a 1? But I do recommend soft collections. I don't like collection agencies, but I am going to recommend a service to you. We found a resource called Trojan Professional Services. Aaron, I'm going to ask you to dig up their URL. I believe it's Trojan Online. The founder of the company is a USC graduate, University of Southern California, hence the name Trojan. But for a fee, and I believe the fee is $14.95, they'll send a letter to your patients, and the letter will say something like this: Naren, there's an outstanding balance between you and the name of the dental office. Remember, this is coming from a third party. This letter is to inform you that you need to pay that within the next 30 days. If you do not pay that in full within the next 30 days, unfortunately, we'll be forced to report you as an unpaid account to all 3 credit bureaus. So for that fee of $14.95, they send the letter out. And I like that it comes from a third party, not you. And then the patient is in charge of contacting you to make payment or make arrangements within the next 30 days. And if they don't do that, then as part of that fee, Trojan reports them as an unpaid collection account. Most of the time, the patient will pay because they don't want to have the negative review on their credit report. And for the most part, it usually doesn't end up in a broken relationship, because the patient realizes that they were just stringing you along and they need to be responsible and pay for this. I believe Trojan Online. Is that correct, Naren?
That is correct. TrojanOnline.com.
Yeah, there you go. There's a resource for you. And those are the 2 categories of collections, hard and soft. I don't recommend hard. The only time I'd pursue hard is if you've been defrauded. If literally a patient has committed identity theft and they present themselves as someone other than they are, and then we go to collect from them and discover that that wasn't who they were. And if you're thinking, well, Gary, how in the world could that ever happen? It's happened. It's happened. That's the only time I pursue hard collections. Otherwise, handle it with collection service. You're paying $14.95 for a letter. What threshold would I use? Naren, what would you pay $15 for with the opportunity to collect? If it was $100, would you pay $15 to get $100? Would you take a $15 risk?
Yeah, I mean, personally, I would. Yeah.
Yeah. $50?
Depends on what chance I would have gotten the money otherwise. If there's like 0 chance of me getting it, I might still even take $50.
Yeah, I'd say no on that one.
Okay.
Yeah, just spending 15 to get 50. I don't like that. I don't like the ratio, but
Right.
Maybe down to 100.
15, you mean?
Down to 100, I would. In other words, $100 balance, I would use the letter. $50, I probably would.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Gary. Let me ask you question number 3. One of the 4 KPIs you mentioned is following up on unpaid insurance claims. This is something we don't do consistently. How can I help my financial coordinator understand that this has to be done consistently?
This is a common situation I see in my client base, that we have a great financial coordinator, great insurance coordinator. However, she does many other duties, many other things besides just, insurance coordination. And these other duties, like answering the phone, like checking people in, like checking them out, get in the way of her following up the insurance company, because it takes time to follow. First of all, you're going to be put on hold by the insurance company, so it takes time. But depending on the size of your practice, this typically needs to be done weekly. And again, depending on the size of your practice, that might be a 2 or 3 hour task following up on unpaid insurance claims. Remember, the squeaky wheel gets the grease when it comes to insurance companies. If you don't follow up with them on unpaid claims, they'll take as long as you let them to pay, because they're making tons of money on the float, on keeping your money. They make tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars on the float. So they're motivated to not pay you. And the only way we get them to pay is to, squeaky wheel gets the grease, is to push those claims through the process. And that takes following up. So your insurance coordinator needs to have dedicated time every week where she follows up with the insurance, and she might need to leave her station at the front desk to do that. And the way I would help if I heard the question right, how do you help your team member understand that? That was the question, right?
Yes.
How do we help that person understand that? You sit down with that person and say, let's say her name is Susan. Susan, you have many admin responsibilities in the practice, but I want you to know your number one responsibility is to control our insurance accounts receivable. That's your number one responsibility. And when we do an annual review, which we do for all of our team members, we'll look at a variety of ways to evaluate your performance, but the number one way we're going to evaluate your performance is your success at controlling the insurance accounts receivable. And sometimes it just takes dedicated time. So I need you to manage your time in such a way so that you can spend dedicated time every week to do that. Because otherwise we're going to see those claims mount. Darren, I have an example from our coaching work. We had a situation with one of our clients where their insurance coordinator, who did a brilliant job, unfortunately, her husband got transferred out of state and they had to move. Mm-hmm. She got transferred out of state. And the team said, Doc, take your time replacing her because we want to have the right person in that job. Don't just hire because it's an open position. We can handle things up front. This was a 3-person front office, and now it was down to 2 because we had an open position to fill. But they said, we can kind of hold the fort down, just the 2 of us, but take your time. Well, it took 8 weeks to find a replacement, but they found a really, really, really good replacement. So before, remember the benchmark I used, no more than 20 insurance claims that age 30 days or more in a thriving practice. This was a 2-doctor practice. And before our insurance coordinator left, they had 36 claims that were past due. How are they doing on the report card for a 2-doctor practice, Darren?
They're doing extremely well.
A+.
A+.
Now, it took 8 weeks to hire a new insurance coordinator. And it took her a couple of weeks to kind of get settled, get her feet on the ground, get familiar with the practice. But one of the first things she did was start to clean up these accounts receivable insurance. In that 10-week span, 36 claims went to 110 claims. Why was it 110, Aaron? Because nobody was following up on them. Correct. Remember, if you're not following up on the insurance, you're going to sit on them. So we now hire a new insurance coordinator, give her a couple weeks to settle into the job. She immediately tackles it. Within a couple weeks after that, it's down to 38. So 36 claims, 110, down to 38. That's what happens if we don't follow up.
Thank you, Gary. Let me ask you the next question. This is the last question, question number 4. There are payment options that have recourse. Would you, you are a practice coach, Gary, would you ever consider using recourse payment option?
Okay, I'm gonna give you a straight answer right off the top on that. No. Now let's explain recourse and non-recourse. For example, care credit. You likely all use care credit. I really like care credit as an option. We use the 12-month. So in care credit, you can offer interest-free to your patients, and care credit has a variety of interest-free programs, so no interest to the patient. And those can be 12-month interest-free, 24-month interest-free. I don't like to go beyond 12-month interest-free for care credit because that discount rate is 9.9%. So in other words, you pay, can we call 9.9 10%? Sure.
Yes.
You're paying 10% for that. Would I pay 10% to offer the patient interest-free financing? Yes, I would. I don't like it, but I would. Now, care credit is non-recourse, meaning that if the patient, if care credit approves them and the patient doesn't pay, that's care credit's problem.
Okay.
Not yours. A recourse program, on the other hand, a recourse program is one that is shared risk. In other words, the financing company shares risk, but so do you. You have to pay it if the patient doesn't pay. I wouldn't touch a recourse system because if a finance company offers recourse, they'll grant credit to everybody because ultimately they're granting credit to you, doctor, because you're the one that has to pay if they don't pay. Does that make any sense, Darren?
It does, Gary.
Would you do
that? Maybe. What do you think?
No way. I wouldn't do it. Because basically they're going to prove everybody.
Okay.
And then when they don't pay, then you get dinged. Now, care credit won't approve everybody. But if you get a denial from a care credit, what does that say? What does that say if you have
bad
a denial
patient?
From
it's a bad patient.
The patient isn't creditworthy.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying, why are you going into a trap knowingly?
Yeah.
Like if you know it's going to turn out bad, why do you go through the pain? Just let it go.
Yeah. Another option I like that is also non-recourse is called Proceed. Proceed, Proceed. Naren, would you look up the URL for Proceed? I believe it's Proceed Finance, but I'd like to get it for sure. So Proceed is a little bit different. It's non-recourse. So in that way, it's just like Care Credit. But the minimum amount the loan is $3,500, and they'll go up to $80,000. Now, $80,000 is kind of crazy in a dental environment, but they'll go up to $80,000.
The website is Proceed Finance, Gary, but I don't believe they work in Canada, for example. So I think it's only.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So Naren's in Toronto. So I believe the URL is Proceed Finance.
You're correct.
Yeah. So they'll go up to 96 months, which allows the payment amount, the monthly payment, to be reduced. And what I recommend to my clients is that's a good payment option for those cases between $10,000 and $20,000. Now, it could be used for larger cases too, but that $10,000 to $20,000, where a lot of people, like, let's say it's some fairly complex dentistry that needs to be done, not full mouth reconstruction, but there's some significant dentistry. A lot of people would like to get that done, but guess what? I don't have the 20 grand. Well, now you can finance it through Proceed, assuming they're approved. And the patient now can make a payment that might be a lot like a car payment, might be like $250 a month, $275 a month. And again, that's not chump change for the patient, but all of a sudden it's more accessible, more affordable, realistic for them to do that, more affordable. And it is non-recourse. It is the interest rate that the patient pays and the discount rate that you pay is on a sliding scale based on their credit rating. If their credit rating is very high and they're very creditworthy, lower interest rate for the patient, lower discount rate for you. And of course, you get to decide. You find out what that, you only care about the discount rate. How much are you going to be charged? And if the discount rate is too high, you can say, no, I'm not going to do that. I don't want to take that risk. But that's a good way to have a full suite of payment options so that you can offer a solution when people say, I'd like to have it done, but I can't afford it. You know, the truth is, Naren, the vast majority of cars, trucks in the United States, I'm talking about passenger trucks, not commercial trucks, are sold by financing. You know, the number one vehicle sold in the United States is a Ford F-150 pickup, a Ford F-150 pickup. And those can range from $30,000 to $110,000, depending on the model. And the truth is, the average comes out about $54,000. If the only way someone could buy a Ford F-150 pickup is to, write a check or pull out a credit card for $54,000, guess what? There's not going to be many traffic jams.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
Not going to happen. But when they can buy that Ford truck, that $54,000 truck for a $700 a month payment, they're in. So you want to have a full suite of payment options. Well, this was a tactical episode. Some of our episodes are tactical, and this was one of those. This might be a great episode to play with your team members together as a team and kind of decide how you want to take action. Well, as we finish up today, some thank yous are in order. Naren, thank you for co-hosting this podcast. Thanks for all the amazing work that you and your team members do to not only help LifeSmiles, but to help all of our clients master the world of digital marketing, help dental offices all over the country attract quality new patients. If you'd like to find out if you have an interest in getting more and better new patients, I would encourage you to schedule a marketing strategy meeting. You can go to ekwa.com, ekwa.com /MSM, stands for Marketing Strategy Meeting, and schedule a marketing strategy meeting and see what Ekwa can do for you. I'm thrilled that we've been a client now for almost 7 years, and I couldn't be happier with the results. We see those results repeated time and again with our clients. So I encourage you to take advantage of that marketing strategy meeting. Also want to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you today for the privilege of your time. We look forward to connecting with you on the next Thriving Dentist Show.